Is the Shield worth winning in the Traitors New Zealand, as its latest winner joins a list of banished players? I'm starting to get the feeling that within this season the Shield is not the blessing it's supposed to be, but it's actually more of a curse. For the third time in a row, the player who has won the Shield has ended up being banished. First it was Philly, then Robbie, and in this episode we see who the unlucky third person was. Before that happened, we found out why Brooke and Dan were interrupted after they sealed the letter containing the name of their latest victim. If the letter wasn't already sealed, I would have thought a death list would be happening. Instead, Paul told them they had to write 3 names that were going to be kidnapped, separately to who they actually wanted to eliminate. As they could have a traitor on the list, Anna, Brooke and Julia were the kidnapped names, and Dylan was the choice for murder. Dylan felt the no-brainer choice, a very intelligent person who was putting things together about Brooke and Dan. It would have been interesting to see him as a traitor. As he said in his VT, he would have joined them if they had tried to seduce him. Was there an opportunity lost to give Brooke and Dan more leverage in the game? The plan was for Brooke and Dan to use the mission as an opportunity for Dan to work the Faithfuls to save himself, while Brooke can work Anna and Julia. It didn't look like much of that actually happened, especially as Dan was already in a car with people he considered were less likely to vote for him. Dan knew he was going to have a job on his hands to save himself, given that during the previous roundtable, Robbie stared at him after he voted for her. Lots of the initial talk at breakfast while waiting for the others was about Dan, talking about that stare and his general play in the game. While in the car, Sam suggested going after Dan instead of Kings. Voting talk was mainly about Dan, Kings and Vanda, but this really became a Dan versus Vanda vote. Outside of Robbie's death stare, the Faithfuls' reasons for suspecting Dan and Vanda were similar. They would make a good traitor, and they were more on the quiet side of bringing up names and their thoughts on the game. Despite early dismissals of Vanda being a traitor, those suspicions have resurfaced, putting to one side the reason they ended up thinking she might be a Faithful. I think Dan mentioning that Robbie winked to him was a misstep. No one mentioned it as they were only talking about the stare. No one actually saw the wink. He didn't need to bring it to their attention. I think it just gave the Faithfuls another reason to think he's a traitor. If Dan just concentrated on defending only Robbie's stare, then maybe he might have had a better chance of convincing them. On his 4th trip to the armory, Dan had finally found the shield, but like the 2 previous holders of the shield, Dan was banished in a very close vote between him and Vanda. This now leaves Brooke as the lone traitor. I do wonder when the Faithfuls will start to look at Brooke as a possible traitor. Colin had warned Brooke that his lack of separation from Dan in the game could make people suspicious. Also, Brooke, along with Justine and Kings, voted for Vanda. Kings is already a suspect for some, so if anyone looks at Brooke's vote and his defense of Dan, then eyes should be on Brooke. I question why the Faithfuls haven't really scrutinized Brooke. A couple of them have thought about it, and it seemed to have been dismissed or not brought up again. Despite the excellent record of the Faithfuls, could Brooke actually win this? Let me know what you think. As the lone traitor, Brooke needed to blackmail Faithful. His initial choices were Colin, Justine or Kings. Justine would be a good choice if you want to turn someone who was dangerous to the Traitors game. In a similar way, Colin, but he would also be a good one to mess and confuse the Faithfuls. Kings would be a sacrifice choice in the same way Robbie was. There is already suspicion against Kings, and he could easily be banished before the final episode. Brooke was just about to write King's name, but he chose Colin instead. At the rate this show is going, how long will Colin actually last as a traitor?